Hello and welcome to the I&I podcast. In this episode, I will be speaking to Dr. Frank King. My name is Dan Aspel. I'm the Communications Manager here at the Institute. Dr. King is a Fellow in Computer Science at Churchill College, which is just over the way from the Newton Institute. He's also the University bell ringer and keeper of the University clock. And beyond that, he is the Chairman of the British Sundial Society, which is a tremendous series of positions. So, Dr. King, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, good to see you.
And the reason that we're speaking to you is that a lot of listeners to the podcast may have noticed or may have remembered your name. In February 2019, and we're recording this at the end of March, you were featured in quite a number of newspaper articles, and that concerned your love and expertise for sundials. So do you want to tell me a little bit about that media coverage which you received?
Yes, that was essentially a direct consequence of the launch of a book written by me and Lina Cardozo-Kindersley of the Cardozo-Kindersley Workshop in Victoria Road in Cambridge. I have been working for that workshop for the better part of 40 years. We published this book, and as a consequence of the publication of the book, there was quite a lot of media interest. Several newspapers and television and radio companies came and spoke to me about one aspect of sundials or another. The book is entirely about sundials, both their design and their manufacture. So it's a sundialing part of that which was of interest. But of course, in talking about sundials, you necessarily talk about the history of time, and people's understanding of the way a day passes has changed greatly over the millennia.
And the angle which a lot of the newspapers went for in their stories was that sundials and the art of building them and understanding them is a dying art. Is that true?
Well, it does seem to be the case that in Britain, at least, and as chairman of the British Sundial Society, I'm always on the lookout for new members, and new members, unfortunately, seem to have a much higher average age than I would like. It's very difficult to persuade people under the age of 60 to become enthusiastic about sundials. That does mean that they might be recently retired, and so could be a very good thing, but naturally it'd be nice to have some young people taking an interest in sundials. But whether they think they're totally uncool or simply don't have the necessary mathematical and geometrical skills needed to understand the sundials, I don't know. But there is definitely a shortage of people coming into the business of being interested in sundials.
Yeah, I'm really interested, obviously, to speak about the mathematical element, which you just missed there. But before we get to that, shall we speak a little bit about why you're passionate about sundials?
Well, I came into sundials almost by accident, but very quickly became hooked on sundials. And I very quickly discovered that once you start taking an interest in sundials, there are any number of ways in which your interest can go. And if you have an eclectic type of mind like mine, it goes in all directions simultaneously. And for example, you can learn a lot about religion from sundials, partly surprisingly. For example, Islamic prayer times are governed by the position and angle of the sun. And you can learn about history. For example, time was not reckoned anything like the way it is today, 24 hours, equal hours from midnight to midnight. Much more often, it was 12 hours from sunrise to sunset. Divide the day in daylight period into 12, and that necessarily has consequences because in winter you have relatively short hours, and in summer you have relatively long hours. And then again, there is the artistic aspects, the commemorative aspects. You investigate a sundial and you find who the maker was and why it was made, and you very quickly find yourself for example, if I study an Italian sundial, into the politics associated with the unification of Italy in the 19th century, all these things suddenly come out in the wash once you start studying sundials.
I would have no idea of that unless you told me that. But as you say, you can use them as a lens through which to view the period in which they were made and the people that made them.
Yes, I mean, a particular example, sort of where you bring in both religion and history, is the investigation of the date of Easter, which the Roman Catholic Church, which dominated at the time of the investigation, were very keen on getting it right. There was this belief that Easter should be the first Sunday after the first full moon after the equinox, and they quickly realised, well, I say quickly, rather slowly realised that the date of Easter was drifting, or that whole calendar was drifting. That's why Pope Gregory invented his new calendar, or commissioned a panel to investigate the reform of the calendar. And it's that kind of thing. Once you start looking at it, you can see that Sundials come very much into that. And indeed, those of you who are paying attention this year, 2019, may have noticed that only last week we had the vernal equinox. That was on a Wednesday. And then the following day we had a full moon. So last Sunday was Easter. But no, it wasn't. And you can see that even after all this investigation, they didn't quite get it right. The date of Easter is these days strictly, I say these days, since Pope Gregory's time, strictly done by algorithm rather than by the way the sun and the moon actually are. That's the sort of thing that comes out of studying sundials.
And we've sort of discussed your passion for sundials, but that sells you a little bit short, doesn't it? Because not only are you knowledgeable and passionate about them, but you've manufactured or been designed a great number. Is that right?
Yes, I have been involved in the design. Had a hand in the design of numerous sundials, both in Britain and overseas. I think in Europe I've got them in Sweden, Holland, Germany, and Italy, and France, and plenty in Britain as well. And they vary from really big and expensive ones, like one on the London Stock Exchange. The biggest one I've got in Cambridge is in Founders Court of Pembroke College, which you can readily see when cycling northwards along Tennis Court Road. But then I make little ones as well. Indeed, I can make a perfectly workable sundial out of a bent piece of cardboard.
and actually, we may very well shoot a video in which we look at this pamphlet, which you showed me slightly earlier, which was advertising the book which you've recently released, but also forms a sundial within its fold, which is just tremendous to see. So you said the price can range from 10p for that up to considerably more.
£250,000 perhaps for a big sundial. Yes.
And that £250,000 probably refers to the sundial on the stock exchange, which, as you pointed out, adjusts for leap years.
Yes,
it's incredible.
There are numerous different kinds of sundial. The most primitive form of sundial is simply yourself walking along and looking at your own shadow. They've evolved somewhat since then, and nowadays, because there are seriously mathematically minded people investigating sundials, all kinds of intriguing developments have come about in the past 30, 40, 50 years. My novelty for the London Stock Exchange was to have, it's not actually called a sundial, it's called a noon mark, so it really comes into its own only at noon or around noon. It sort of comes to life about 40 minutes before noon, and it measures noon in 3 different ways. You may think, well, surely noon is noon. Well, not quite, because you have a Greenwich mean noon, and you have local mean noon, and then you have local absolute sun time, sun noon, when the sun is due south, and these are not quite at the same time. But around noon, this sundial will go tick, 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 you get 3 positions when it's telling you 3 different sorts of noon, and it goes along a little stripe on what is known as the analemma. That's one of those figure of 8 shapes which relates what's called the solar declination to the equation of time. Now, if you have a big enough analemma, you can cut it up into strips. It's a sort of ribbon, and you cut it up into nearly horizontal strips. And I've got 366 strips on this, one for every possible day of the year, including the 29th of February. And in what is known as a common year, such as 2019, the spot of light generated by this sundial, by the sun at noon, will run along the strip for the 28th of February one day. Next day it will run along the 1st of March strip, missing out the 29th of February strip. But when it's a leap year, then the spot of light runs along the 29th of February strip, and I believe this is the only sundial anywhere which can reliably tell you that today is the 29th of February on the rare occasion that it is.
Well, that's something incredible. I want to talk to you because it leads very well into the precision of the mathematics that must be required for it to do that. But before we do that, just as a side note, you said that you've built or designed and then had built sundials around Europe. It's obviously quite a different world to one that most of us know. Do the people that need these sundials find you through the British Sundial Society, or is there some other means by which people discover a rare expert like yourself?
Well, I do my best to have a lot of publicity going for sundials, and not surprisingly, if you put in a huge amount of effort trying to have a public relations job on sundials, sooner or later 1 or 2 people are going to pick you up. And so I have been picked up by various people who like essentially sculptors and designers who are perfectly capable of making very beautiful sundials but have no idea how the mathematics works. And so we work together in harness. On the whole, we've always got on, whoever it's been, really rather well, because I don't count myself in any way as good at aesthetics, but I recognise good aesthetics when I see them. I just don't produce them. And these people on the whole have no understanding of mathematics at all, so we never get cross with each other. And it works rather well. So it is very nice to be able to be working as somebody who is pretending to be mathematical with somebody who is quite different, and yet we are together producing an end product which people can enjoy in various ways. And those who look at the London Stock Exchange sundial can look at it as essentially a mathematical exercise and say, wow, that must have involved some incredibly precise surveying, which indeed it did. Equally, people can say, gosh, look at the way the sizes of the letters change, and look at the way that indeed the whole lettering changes to echo the fact that lines are getting further apart as the sun goes across from, or the shadow goes across from west to east, from east to west, and then you can enjoy what it looks like, and you can make very, very beautiful objects which are based on sundials.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's talk now about the mathematics of it, because obviously as a doctor of computer science, you're now dealing in mathematics and I'm guessing geometry.
Yes.
So what is involved in the design of one of these sundials? If you can explain it to someone like myself who is not a mathematician.
Well, clearly you need to know where the sun is. During the course of the day, the sun goes across the sky. It begins each day roughly in the east, where it rises, and then it goes up across the sky. Its highest point when it's due south, and then it sets roughly in the west. But from very common experience, you know that during winter, the sun never gets anything like so high as it does in extreme summer. Moreover, it rises in a quite different place. This is why people go to Stonehenge for the solstices, because they can spot the direction of sunrise. Very roughly speaking, in Britain, certainly the northern part of Britain, the sun rises in extreme summer. It rises in the northeast and sets in the northwest, and in extreme winter, it rises southeast and sets southwest. And by exploiting these two ranges, the range of direction and the range of maximum height, then you can tell the time of day and you can tell the time of year. So that's the essence of it.
So on a different day of the year, the sun will be in a subtly different position.
Yes.
At the same clock time.
If you are unwise enough to stare at the sun all day, which is definitely not recommended, indeed you should never look directly at the sun, but you can certainly look directly at its shadow, and you'll see the shadows during the winter get longer and longer, and even at midday, your shadow is very long at noon. If you just stand with your back to the sun midday on the winter solstice, you will see the shadow is very, very much longer than you are. In summer, the length of a shadow at midday, your shadow in Britain, is much shorter than you are. And just by noting the length of your shadow at noon, you can get a rough estimate of the time of year.
Would I be right in presuming that the big challenge comes not necessarily in the calculations beforehand, but in transmitting that into whatever device is built? Is that right to say?
Yes. Calculations, once you've got the hang of it, are not that difficult. The problem is what I would call implementation. And if somebody commissions a sundial to go on a wall, then you need to know the latitude of a wall. That's usually quite easy, but you also need to know its orientation, what I would describe as the direction of its outward normal, as an azimuth value. That's the compass bearing round from true north. And roughly speaking, it's much easier if a wall faces due south, but they almost never do. And if you have a wall which faces somewhat to the east or somewhat to the west, you have to make allowance for that, because what you're really doing is projecting the sun's passage onto the sundial, and if you're not pointing directly at the sun's midpoint, then you're going to find that your sundial is slightly off-centre, and that's how it should be. So most wall sundials have these delightful asymmetries, and that's part of the fun.
How interesting. And have there been any projects you've worked on which have been more or less difficult than others? Have there been some which have presented the most difficult means of inserting them into their...
Well, it would be nice to say the most difficult aspects of sundialing is to produce a really exciting mathematical sundial where there's nice challenging mathematics. The sad truth is the most difficult part of making a sundial is getting a local authority permission to put a sundial on somebody's wall, especially if it's an ancient building. And that's particularly difficult in Cambridge colleges. And it can take 2 or 3 years to get a local authority to agree to have a sundial on a wall, even on a relatively new building, because they worry about it being nearby ancient buildings which might be somehow distracted from if you've got a sundial on a wall. So that's really and truly the most difficult part of sundials. It's not the mathematics, it's not the surveying to set it out, and it's not even the aesthetic design, it's the administrative side.
The downside of Cambridge life.
Well, it's even worse in London, where you've got any number of bodies. I mean, I did one in a large building in London 4 years ago, I suppose, and there seemed to be about 7 bodies. There was the City of London Conservation Society, English Heritage, the local ordinary authority, London, as some organisation which looks after London monuments as a whole, and every single one had to be convinced that it was all right. That's the sort of thing that we have to worry about.
Well, before I move on to my final question, can I just ask how many people are there globally, perhaps, or in Britain, if that's easier, that do what you do?
Well, there are very few people who do exactly what I do, probably maybe 100, possibly 200 in the whole world. But there are, fortunately, a good many more people who are at least have a sort of passing understanding of what's going on and know what the right questions are. There are many, many more people who could do this. Anybody who works in the Isaac Newton Institute as a mathematician could certainly do the sorts of things I do. It's just, on the whole, they haven't got around to thinking about it. I find that with serious astronomers, you tell them about the sort of things that sundials can do, and they say, oh, yes. Now, they can see it's utterly obvious once you spell it out to them, but it's not something that people are taught these days.
And let's address the point which it would be criminal of me not to ask. Isaac Newton is credited with having built sundials as a boy. What's your experience of that, and what can you tell us about that, if it's true?
Well, I'm sure it is true. I mean, it is undeniably the case, well known, well attested, that some of Isaac Newton's sundials still survive. Whether he actually produced anything decent as a boy or not, I simply don't know. I've been to the house in Grantham and had a look around and seen works of the boy Newton, which were mostly moderately destructive. But it is certainly possible, and I don't deny this, that he could have made sundials as a boy, but I would not like to say, hand on heart, that that's certainly what he did.
And before we wrap up, I was just going to ask you finally, your passion and interest is obvious, and I'm sure that there are other people that share it with you. What can we do to make sure that the expertise about sundials and the passion for sundials carries through into this generation and future generations?
Well, it would be ever so nice, but I think this is wishful thinking, if more geometry could be taught in schools. I think people still just about know what a right angled triangle is when they've taken A-level mathematics, but truly they haven't had the feeling of drawing circular arcs and understanding spherical trigonometry, all that kind of thing, which was very common in the A-level syllabus when I did it 60 years ago.
Okay, well, I will have to do a poll of the participants at the Newton Institute and see how many know the function of a sundial and the basis of its function and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Ask the senior members of the Isaac Newton Institute how many are familiar with circular points at infinity in projective geometry.
That is the phrase I need to use.
That's the phrase to use.
Well, Dr. Frank King, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you.
And wish you all the best. And for listeners that are interested, we will put details in the description of the book which has recently been released. I've got it on the table in front of me, and it's a beautiful looking piece of work, so I look forward to having a look through that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.